Okay, so I would like to give a brief presentation on new approaches to futuring, new approaches to look ahead, and design is playing a big role in that process. And it's all about climate adaptation and amphibious transformation. So let's go back to 2021 in the Netherlands and Europe. You see here we had a devastating flood caused by stagnant rainstorms, and we had 229 fatalities and a lot of damage. But that was also in other places, as Dr. Serey already mentioned in the previous presentation. So if we see what do we share, what Indonesian and Thailand and the Netherlands have shared is the way we are addressing flood risk. And you can say in the old days, we were just reacting after events. And then we learned that it's better to prepare for flood and to take some measures. And now we are in a situation where we acknowledge that the system around us is gradually changing and that we have to adapt our cities, our infrastructure, our lives to changing conditions. But when we look into the future, it will be probably different. And what will be different is that we do not have to deal with slow changing conditions alone, but we also have to deal with what we call extreme weather events, which are so difficult to predict. So we have to anticipate, say, also trends in extreme events beyond the slow changing drivers. So we need to prepare for, we can say, unimaginable future. And if we look at the policy and the governance which comes along with that, we realize that in the old days we were able to incrementally adjust our infrastructure, our design, our way of living, but that we now have to jump into what we call a transformative change. We have to really make radical changes in the way we are designing our cities, in the way we are, yeah, you can say, shaping our future. And that is also what we want to see in this summer course. Now, if we look at the urban challenges nowadays, and it's based on interviews with experts around the world, then that you can say that still many cities are focused on the short-term solution. We do not have, say, an envision a future which is far ahead of us and try to mirror, say, the short-term solution against an aspiring future. No, we are just incrementally adjust our systems. What we also see is that transition is not only happening in the water management domain, also in the domain of energy and in the domain of food production, as the ambassador was already saying. And what we believe is that these transitions, where much of the money is going to, where the economy is, will drive our future. It's not water which will drive our future, but it will be the energy and food production. So that means in design and design-based processes, we need to be aware what is happening in the domain of energy and food production. We need to understand what are the major challenges over there and what are the pathways which are being followed. And that is driving also urbanization and driving water management. What we also see is that the opportunities to really make a system jump and to really make a transformative change are narrowing down. And that is because we are rapidly expanding our cities, we are rapidly growing, and that also means that we have to be very, I would say, aware that there is not much time ahead to make that radical change. And all what is needed to get there is a vision on the future. We need to have a long-term vision, a long-term strategy to get there. Now, what do we share? What is Indonesia and Thailand and the Netherlands? What do they share? We see there's a pressure on cities. Cities have to be energy friendly, neutral. They have to be flood climate resilience. They have to adapt to changing conditions. And also, what we see is that the time horizons of planning are shifting from short term to long term. What we share is the need for transformative change. We see that we cannot incrementally adjust our systems again and again. No, we need to rely and need to imagine new systems and new futures for us. So that also means in terms of governance, the governance should shift from an adaptive to a transformative management style. And that is a different style. That is a style where we need to bring in, you can say, different disciplines, and we need to work in a design-based approach on that future. And the last point is that we see that our paradigms are shifting. In the old days, we thought we understand and could follow the changes, and we could make scenarios based on climate scenarios. But now we see that complexity is increasing, that we are much more uncertain about the future than we were in the past, and that it comes down to what is really important to us. What is a desired future for us? What are our values? Where do we want to go to instead of where we are going to just through incremental changes? Now, in the COP26, the big climate platform where the big leaders came together in the UK, it was really clear that there was a shared notion that we have to act now. But what we also saw is there is a resistance to change. Everybody, also us, find it difficult to change. But we need to change to make that, say, that radical transformative change which is needed for our climate survival. And to get there, we need to have an appealing future. And what was concluded on the COP26, that we still lack that envisioning future, that appealing future. So how do we get there? How do we drive change? Now, there are in principle, two trajectories. There is the trajectory of what we call grand design, and there is the trajectory of locally led adaptation. And let me start with the first. The grand design comes with a vision which is far in the future. It is in particular developed and imposed by the senior government, by cities themselves. It is more top-down driven. It encompasses the catchment and the national scale. And we also see that the process to get there is on the one hand imagination, to imagine the future, but on the other hand, evidence building. It's the analysis, system analysis, understanding how the system is functioning. Now, that you can say that dialogue between imagination and evidence, that is what brings the grand design. So we need to unlock our imagination, but on the same hand, we need to build evidence, and we need to really try to understand how the system is working. And those two in combination are resulting in the grand design. The grand design is able to drive change, to really set people into a mode of activity. The other way to get there is the locally led adaptation. It starts with small initiatives in a neighborhood, in villages, in small communities, and these are, say, getting important because they are demonstrating that change can be done. Now, we see a lot of examples in cities where we have locally led adaptation. And these locally led adaptations, they can drive change. Now, an important example of a locally led adaptation is what we see in the Netherlands. We call it tile lifting. And tile lifting is an activity where communities in streets can remove the pavement of their streets, and they will plant trees, and they make those areas green by lifting the tiles. And that is very much stimulated by the city, by the water boards. So you see gradually that cities in the Netherlands are becoming more green because the people themselves are removing the tiles and planting trees and vegetation. And that demonstration, that really acting, is really stimulating for others to follow. So, in conclusion, we have two ways to drive change. One is imagining a future and a grand design, and on the other hand, small steps by really doing something on the ground, like that silence. Now, let me start with the grand design and what is the grand design in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, we have the Delta program, and the Delta program started in 2010, and that is aimed to really assure that our country will be safe on the longer term and that we can deal with sea level rise and other effects of climate change. And the assumptions which were made when the program was started comes down to three conditions. The first condition is the assumption that climate change is slow but might accelerate after 2050. The second assumption is that we know how the water system is working and that we can predict the water system. Can you still hear me? Oh.
Yes, we can hear you, Chris.
Okay, then I continue. Yeah, you can see my slides?
Yes.
You can see my slide? Okay, good. So the second condition is that we know how the system is working, the water system, and we have models to really predict the behavior. So we had a very clear notion about the system and how to influence the system. And the third assumption was that based on that knowledge, we could anticipate a future, a long-term future, and by anticipating, we could prevent disastrous events. So these were the assumptions in 2010 when we start the Delta program. But we are now in a different situation. We are now in 2023, 2024, and we learned that the assumptions we made, the convictions we made, are no longer valid. We have to really change our assumptions. And one of the assumptions which we need to change is that climate change is not something of the future. Climate change is happening now, and it's not gradual, it's what we call capricious. It comes with sudden extreme events which are very hard to predict. Then the assumption that we know how the system is working is no longer true because we see that the models we are using, the delta models and the hydrological models, are not really telling what we are seeing. For instance, the prolonged periods of droughts and the consequences of droughts are very hard to model. And also how the river system is behaving and how the rivers are responding to intense rainfall are different than we assumed. And that means that we can no longer rely on only knowledge and models, that we need to unlock other capacities in ourselves to deal with these challenging future. We need to really embark on another way, and that is, you can say, imagination. So when we look into the far future of the Netherlands, say by 2100, Then we imagine there are different futures. There's a future of protection, where we, like a fortress, build and raise the current dike systems of the Netherlands. We are strengthening the delta works, which allows us to deal with a few meter sea level rise. Or another future is that we say we are really living with water. We are no longer raising our dikes, but we are allowing the water to come in, and we are moving along with the fluctuating water levels. Now, if we imagine those futures and we are via backcasting, look what it means for now, then it comes clear that we have in time, and not in that remote future, important points where we have to make a decision. We call it the tipping points. There are tipping points in time far before 2100, which we have to agree upon if we want to follow one of those futures. So we call that the bifurcation point. And we realize that the bifurcation points are much nearer than we thought in the previous time. So it means that we are confronted with big decisions in the coming decades, how we want to shape our future, and that we no longer can postpone those decisions, that we have to take rigorous measures. And that is, I think, not only happening in the Netherlands, but that's also happening in Thailand and in Indonesia. For instance, in the city of Jakarta. The city of Jakarta is facing huge challenges, and the awareness that only incremental steps are enough will no longer be valid. Jakarta has to take big steps, and those big steps are quite closer than we thought in the past. So when we look into the delta works, and these were the results of a tipping point, and that tipping point was a disaster. And we designed the delta works to protect our country. So you can say that radical change in our delta management, that transformative change in delta management which we embraced, was provoked by a disaster. And the result was, you can say, the delta works. Another tipping point we had in time was the Room for the River program. The Room for the River program was, you can say, launched because of the wake-up calls we had in 1993 and 1995, when there were, say, an almost disaster in the Netherlands caused by our river systems. So we realized that the current approach of managing our river should be different, and then we embraced the Room for the River concept, which was a transformative change where we really, you can say, allowed water to expand, and that we had the floodplains to get flooded, and we lowered the dikes. And what you see on the background here is one of the Room for the River projects, where the farmers are also water managers. The farmers are also playing a role in receiving floodwater and accommodating floodwater. So you see here, this was a result of transformative change, which happened after the 1993 and 1995 almost disaster events in the Netherlands. So what are the lessons learned from transformative change? In the first place, we need to have a vision. We need to have a vision supported by spatial designs and spatial visualizations. And these should be underpinned by evidence as much as possible by thorough analysis. Another thing what we learned is that transformative change takes time. We cannot do it overnight. We cannot change a city overnight. It takes a generation, 50 years at least, to get there. And that also means that in our designs, we need to think about the pathways to get there. What are the critical steps in time? Another lesson is learned is that in those visions, we see that nature is leading. we need to balance our approaches much more with natural processes than we did in the past. So nature-based solutions are very important, understanding how the natural processes are working, and try to, as a karate, work along the natural processes. And the last point which we have learned is that we need a tipping point to make the transformative change. And the tipping point in the past was a disaster. But let's hope that we can build tipping points not from disasters, but from we call positive tipping points which are provoking a change and which is not caused by disaster. Now, how to get a positive tipping point? A positive tipping point can be provoked by an appealing design, by an appealing pathway, where people are saying, hey, this is the way we want to follow. And that is what we are trying to do now in the Netherlands in the Delta program. We try to envision appealing futures. And by doing so, we try to get, you can support from the communities to really work along these lines and think along these lines. Now, what you see here is the Netherlands by 2100, different visualizations. On the right-hand side, you see in Netherlands where we allow the water to come in, and we are no longer raising our dikes, but we are protecting our cities. But the rest of the country, which is low-laying, is serving to receive water when the water levels are high. On the left-hand side, you see another strategy where we raise the dikes and where we are shortening our coastline, and where we are, we can say, building a fortress to protect our country. But because that strategy is very expensive, we are shortening the coastline, and we are, you can say, narrowing down the area which is well protected. And on the upper left side, you see an imagination, an appealing future, hopefully, for the city of Rotterdam, where Rotterdam is really embracing water, as you can see here. Now, the technology or the method to get there is we call pluralistic backcasting. So that means that from the present situation, we are imagining a future which is remote, say for instance 2050, and then based on a few scenarios, we are mirroring that future against those scenarios. And then by backcasting, we are developing the pathways to get there. So it is an iterative process from backwards and forwards where we really identify the steps to that future. And design is used in an explorative way to develop those steps. Now, that is the future, at least in our view, to deal with the challenges ahead and to really build the pathways to a transformative future. Another thing what I want to say is the changing role of local governments, the changing role of cities. In the past, the national governments were in the lead to really take action and to provoke a tipping point. What we see now more and more is that local governments are acting as agents of change. They are setting the framework for investments, they are driving local innovation, and they are, by demonstrating, stimulating the scaling up of innovations. And you can imagine when all these cities, all those local governments are working along those ways, collectively, they will play a key role. And I noted here in Bangladesh now we have about 350 small cities, and these cities, at least some of them, are really trying to embark on this pathway, and by doing so, really stimulating others to follow. So I want to conclude with some final conclusions. First, we need tipping points to provoke transformative change. The negative tipping points are the disasters, but we don't want to have another disaster to really provoke change. We want to have a positive tipping point. And a positive tipping point can be can be done, can be stimulated by design. So design can really provoke change, and that is what we want to embrace. So we want to embrace what we call positive tipping points instead of negative tipping points. We see that design and design-based research, where imagination and evidence come together, will be crucial to really shape our future. We can no longer rely only on models and you can say the traditional tools for our future. We really need to unlock our imagination as well. And thirdly, there is not much time to lose. The window of opportunities are narrowing down. We are expanding our cities. We need to accelerate. And one way to accelerate is to really link the bottom up and the top down trajectories to see if we can find synergies between bottom up processes and top down processes. And I hope that in this course, in this summer course, you will be able to follow both trajectories and to have, you can say, a sort of enthusiasm to bring those two trajectories together. So I would like to close off my presentation and thank you for your attention.